Uhuru. Uhuru, and welcome back to the Uhuru Solidarity Movement's bi-monthly webinar talk show. And I'm very honored to be here tonight. My name is Jamie Simpson, and I'm a member of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement. The Uhuru Solidarity Movement is the mass organization of the African People's Solidarity Committee, an organization of white people who fight for reparations and solidarity with African liberation. We work under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party, founded and led by Chairman Omali Yeshitela. We want to salute Chairman Omali Yeshitela, who has been tirelessly struggling for over 50 years for the liberation of Africa and African people under the leadership of the African working class for over 50 years. So Uhuru, and salute to Chairman Omali Yeshitela. And Uhuru. And we also want to salute our leadership, Deputy Chair Ona Zine Yeshitela, who is the Deputy Chair of the African People's Socialist Party and has done so much to build the Black Star Industries and the Black Power Blueprint Project in St. Louis, putting a brand new Uhuru House on the ground, developing the African Independence Workforce Program, and institutions of self-determination and dual and contending power for the African working class in St. Louis and throughout the world. So Uhuru, salute to Deputy Chair Ona Zine, Uhuru. And I'm very honored to have with us tonight the chairwoman of the African People's Solidarity Committee, working under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party for over 40 years, Chairwoman Penny Hess.
Uhuru, Uhuru Jamie, and Uhuru Comrade Jesse. And I just want to welcome everybody here tonight. I want to join in saluting Chairman Omali Yeshitela, my leader, who is the leader of the African Revolution, who has kept the revolution alive in the whole world, who's fought for the interests of the African working class his entire adult life. Without him, where would the world be? Where would the world be? It would be swept under by a vicious counterinsurgency led by U.S. imperialism to destroy the revolutionary struggles of the people on the planet Earth. This is about the African Revolution. I have the honor of working under the leadership of the African Revolution and the African People's Solidarity Committee, which has the mission to extend the African Revolution into the white society, to be able to go and collect other people, to recognize that our truest interest is not to have unity with this vicious U.S. government built on slavery, genocide, and colonialism, wars of occupation, plunder, looting, and rape of the majority of people on the planet Earth, but in seeing a world in which all human beings can live, no one at the expense of anybody else, and that comes about through the leadership of the African working class that is fighting for revolution and for the liberation of all oppressed and colonized people on the planet Earth. So this is the point of view, African internationalism, that we're going to be using tonight to analyze this question of climate change, and we're going to get to that in a minute. But I also want to join in saluting Deputy Chairwoman Ona Zine Yeshitela, who leads all of the economic/political front of the African People's Socialist Party here and around the world. And I want to salute this incredible party, African workers who are organized, who are very serious about winning freedom and liberation, uniting all African people who have been forcibly dispersed around the world, and to liberate Africa, get the colonizers out, take back the stolen resources, the stolen labor, the value of the stolen labor, and create a 12 million square mile large united and liberated Africa. That's what this movement is about. That's what the African People's Socialist Party is about, and I'm very proud to be under the leadership of the party.
Uhuru. Thank you, Chairwoman Penny. We will be hearing more from Chairwoman Penny Hess momentarily. Tonight's episode of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement's talk show is Abrupt, Climate Change, and Imperialism. So we're going to be talking about some pretty intimidating statistics through the optimistic lens of African internationalism. And so we'll get into that shortly, but I also want to introduce our co-host here and the chair of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement. He is a member of the African People's Solidarity Committee, part of the National Central Committee. Uhuru, and welcome, Jesse Nevel.
Uhuru.
Uhuru.
Glad to be
Jesse.
here. Uhuru.
So we're going to be discussing what's going on with the question of climate change tonight.
Yes.
And how that affects the African Revolution, how imperialism has affected abrupt climate change. And while we're doing this, we're calling also on, as Chairwoman Penny just said, our entire existence as the African People's Solidarity Committee, as the Uhuru Solidarity Movement, is about reparations.
Yes.
This is how we make a self-criticism for our standing on the pedestal, the oppression of the rest of the people on the planet Earth, especially African people. And it's how we become part of humanity again. It's how we support the African Revolution. So tonight, we're calling on our supporters who have helped us so generously in the past to step up tonight and go to blackpowerblueprint.org. We have a goal of raising $1,000 to the critical work of the Black Power Blueprint. Again, that's blackpowerblueprint.org. So please get ready to make your generous contributions there now. We'll be talking about that later in the program. And if I'm not mistaken, at this juncture, I'm going to turn it over to Chairwoman Penny, and we're going to discuss this question of abrupt climate change.
Uhuru. Anything else that you were going to say?
Well, just wanted to salute everybody for being here and appreciate Chairwoman Penny and Comrade Jamie, and also wanted to express my deepest unity with and solidarity with the African People's Socialist Party and with our leadership, Chairman Omali Shatella and Deputy Chair Onizanaya Shatella, who are the two most incredible revolutionary leaders on the planet Earth and whose struggle to lead the struggle of African liberation all over the world contains in it the solution to overturning a social system that will annihilate the planet Earth if it is not brought to a stop. So I'm very excited for this program tonight and honored to be a member of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement, the white organization of the African People's Socialist Party, the mass organization of the African People's Solidarity Committee, which is led by Chairwoman Penny Hess, which is the cadre organization of white people working under the party. Chairwoman Penny is going to talk about that and encourage people to join USM. And if you want to go even further and even deeper into that, to join APSC, you should join. You should consider joining. So I want to appreciate being on this program tonight, and just put out that this is a fundraiser for the Black Power Blueprint, and that this is raising concrete resources. We want to raise $1,000 tonight for the Black Power Blueprint. You can go to blackpowerblueprint.org. We want to announce your contributions throughout the program tonight, and this is what reparations looks like: is funding, putting resources towards these concrete economic development projects that are on the ground in St. Louis that are tied to a global strategy of African workers to take back control of their resources and seize political and economic power over their lives and over their destinies. So go to blackpowerblueprint.org, and just throughout the program tonight, just be taking out your credit card and putting in contributions, and share this video, share it all over Facebook, share it all over YouTube, put it on Twitter, put it on Instagram, put it on Snapchat, put it on anything that you're connected to get the word out, because the message that you're about to hear needs to be heard by thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people. So, Uhuru.
Uhuru. Yes, we're raising $1,000 tonight, and I am going to kick it off with a pledge of $50. So, yes, I'm putting in a pledge of $50 tonight. So I'm kicking it off, and you can go ahead and match me or put in 100. We only need 10 people to give 100. So, I just want to start talking about this question of what's called abrupt climate change, something that has really come out and been covered by the news for the first time. And I think this past year, 2018, has really exposed that this reality is upon us. We've seen, these catastrophic witnessed on the earth before, how much of the state of California burned, and even within the context of those fires, things that they called fire hurricanes,
right,
that just created this vortex of spinning wind and fire, and they couldn't control it, and these fires were actually burning uphill, which is the first time they'd ever seen that before. Usually a fire would run downhill. It was just phenomenal. They were not prepared to deal with that. We've also seen constant droughts. We've seen an uptick of earthquakes and volcanoes. which is also tied to the climate change. And you can notice how all these volcanoes are going off all over the place, and earthquakes are taking place. Of earthquakes are taking place almost every day, and especially in this area called the Ring of Fire, which is the up California, or actually I guess from Chile all the way up to California, and then over to Alaska and over to Asia and Japan.
Right.
So it runs this Ring of Fire. We see the hottest temperatures ever, just about ever recorded. I think that this past year was the third highest temperatures ever. And I think that I read that the top 21 years of the hottest temperatures have been in the last 20 years.
Wow.
So, it's the weather is wild, it's unpredictable. It's also, we see the situation where the weather doesn't change. It goes into hot and dry or rainy, and the Gulf Stream gets stuck. It's not able to move in the same way, and this is all a result of what is happening with the climate change. And now a lot of scientists are starting to talk about what they call abrupt climate change. And what that means is that they thought that when there were previous times of massive climate change and rapid extinction, they thought that this took place over centuries or even millennia, which in geological time is not much time. But what they found was that often that these mass extinctions and rapid climate change took place over sometimes a period of a few weeks or months.
Wow.
So this is something that they're coming to terms with. And in fact, I read that some scientists say that they were lying about the status of the seriousness of the climate change, and because really a lot of climate scientists were paid by Texaco and the fossil fuel industry and coal.
So they were taking money to give a rosier picture of what was going on.
Yeah, they couldn't say what they thought. And of course, why would why would you take money to study climate change from those who created it? And that some scientists are talking about the extinction of all living things, including human extinction. So, I just want to start by saying these are some of the things that are out there now, and these are things that are being put out by prominent scientific climate, experts.
This is not a fringe movement or a small minority of the scientific community. This is a large majority.
This is the real thing, and that the majority of all, I think it's like 90% of all climate scientists agree that this is a reality. So the thing that we have to talk about is, first of all, that this climate change, and they call it Anthropocene, which means human-made, because in other times it's been created by other things, other kinds of factors. But the thing is that it's not just human-made; it's imperialist-made, and this is a thing that really disturbs me and bothers me about most of what you hear, the analysis that you hear of what's happening with the climate change, because it's not all humans. It's imperialism, it's capitalism, it's parasitic capitalism. In fact, Jamie, that they say that the struggle is to not raise the temperature of the planet more than 2 degrees Celsius, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it totally is catastrophic for that to happen. Because actually the difference between an ice age and just a boiling age is only a matter of a few degrees centigrade.
In terms of the average
Celsius.
temperature.
Yeah, okay. and the ability of human beings, human animals, to live on that. So, they talk about this situation, and they talk about this 2 degrees rise of Celsius of temperature, and what they're saying is that this is compared to the temperature of the Earth in 1750, like 1750, because that's what they gauge as the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And, so, well, wait a minute, we have to think about this, because what created the Industrial Revolution and what was happening in 1750? Well, it was just about the height of the assault on Africa, the enslavement and theft of African human beings and turning them into commodities. So there's no separation from that. It really, it is really a foul thing to just take this whole question of climate change out of the context of the assault on Africa, of imperialist attack and genocide against the majority of the people on the planet Earth, against indigenous people. How many hundreds of millions of people have already gone extinct? Right. They already died in this thing. So it is a process that goes all the way back from when Europeans came out of Europe, impoverished, poor, drought, all of this kind of thing, living on a rock, Europeans who were serfs, going out, starting in around 1415 with Prince Henry the Navigator of Portugal, going out and beginning the enslavement of African people, stealing all the gold from Africa, going into what is now the Americas, the Caribbean, and in a matter of 50 years, talk about abrupt climate change.
Right.
In a matter of about 50 years after Columbus landed, in what is now Haiti and Dominican Republic, and all of this area, the Caribbean, all of the indigenous people were dead. They were slaughtered. So they had their abrupt climate change. They had it, and this is all combined in this. And if we don't talk about it, then we're talking about something that has to do with white people, because this is never a concern for the majority of the people on the planet Earth who are already facing drought, facing forced migration because they can't live in the conditions of Africa, of parts of Asia, because they do not have control over their lives and their economy. So, it is a foul thing to take it out of that context and to say that this is one long continuum, and that one thing that we know for sure is that imperialism that caused this will never solve it, will never solve it. And that's why the only answer is revolution, and we're going to talk about that and what that takes to do. But I do want to say a little bit more about some of the effects of the climate situation. First of all, the Earth has not been as hot as it is now for 120,000 years. So there has not been this much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere for 800,000 years. So that's how serious that is. It's like 440 parts per million right now. And 800,000 years. So in other words, human life never existed when there was this much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And so, it's no longer called global warming because it's climate change. So that means that, in certain places, it could be colder than it usually is, because what's happening is the Gulf Stream, it creates what's called feedback loops, reinforcing feedback loops.
For people that don't know, could you give a brief explanation of what the Gulf Stream is?
Well, okay, yes, and I'm not a scientist, so you're going to have to look up some of this yourself. But the Gulf Stream are the winds and the currents in the oceans that depend on a frozen Arctic and Antarctic, landmass that is covered with deep ice. Now that ice is melting so fast, and that when we talk about global warming, we're talking about the fact that here in Florida we're almost tropical. The temperature hasn't changed that much, But what is catching the brunt of the warming is the Arctic. That's what's getting hot. And that the ice is melting. In fact, there's something I saw today in the news. It's like almost every day. The ice is melting so much faster than they ever expected. And it's melting from below. It's not melting from the top. So, it means that the water is warmed and it creates this loop. So the cold ice mass, which first of all reflects the sun away from the earth, but the more that it melts, then the oceans are dark blue and they absorb the heat. So the more that it melts, it creates its own thing where it's getting its own system. It's getting hotter and hotter and hotter because it's absorbing more heat, and therefore it's melting the ice faster and all of this. So as the ice melts, it melts, fresh water into the salt water, and the entire pH system, I guess you would say, of the oceans are based on high salinity and high salt content. So
not brackish water, like it would become fresh.
So as it becomes more less saline and more of fresh water, then all of these systems of the ocean and the pH of it are becoming more acidic, and it can't continue to have the same Gulf Stream. So the Gulf Stream worked on the fact that it pumped with the cold, the frozen Arctic. It pumped water deep down. It created these winds that actually kept the Arctic cold, but moderated much of the northern hemisphere. So what's happening now is that it is pushing the Gulf Stream down so that we can see occasionally. They have this thing called the polar vortex, which they say is coming in a few weeks, which can put like parts of North America that used to not get that, and parts of Europe into a deep freeze, which might last like a month because it doesn't move. It moves slower. It's like the air currents can't move as fast. So it's pushing the cold air down, and the Arctic is hotter and hotter. And it also means that, it's been literally 90 degrees in the summer in the Arctic Circle. And that is, not unheard of in this period.
Yeah, it sounds like
in the last several million years.
It sounds like something of a science fiction movie or something.
It does, indeed.
And so this heating from underneath the ice, does that have to do with the methane that's trapped in the permafrost, or what?
Well, again, I'm not a scientist, but I can say, as I understand it, the heat, again, the oceans are warming. The oceans are warming, and this is really really important to understand, because it means that just this, like say here in Florida, this red tide is because of the acidification of the seas and the oceans, because it can't get rid of it, can't pump it out, can't pump out the the organisms that create this red tide now. And it's seriously killed, I don't know how many hundreds of tons of fish and sea animals, and to the extent that I read one scientist say they're gone from the Gulf. I don't know, but that's what it's saying. And I just read today that the crab industry off of Fort Myers here in Florida is, they have no business anymore. It said that the crab shacks and shops of Fort Myers are now just selling ice. Ice, that's all they can sell. So, in the state of California, this acidification is seen in the destruction of the extinction of the abalones, which was also a fishing industry in Northern California. And
what's type of clam or
it's
oyster?
Kind of it's in the big shell, the thing, and it's something that is a delicacy or whatever, in the state of California, and for eating.
Right.
But that's gone, and of course, famously, the starfish got some kind of virus or some kind of disease a few years ago and just sort of turned into slime. So the starfish are gone. And what's happened is that the kelp forest, which they call the kelp forest, which is the growth of kelp along the shores, which was the habitat for abalone and other important fish, is gone. It's gone. So it means that opportunistic types of other species are coming in there and changing the whole habitat.
Yeah, that's a whole
that.
ecosystem, right?
Exactly.
The kelp and
So, I mean, it's pretty serious. So,
and as you're saying this, one thing that sticks out in my mind immediately is how recent, relatively, the Deepwater Horizon explosion was out in the Gulf, and then they followed that up with dumping all these chemicals that they said we're going to push everything down to the bottom of the ocean, so it'd be out of sight, out of mind, right?
Exactly.
And then the fact that you've got in this city where we're broadcasting here from St. Petersburg. An administration that continually dumps sewage directly into the bay.
And to say that actually, of course, St. Peter's done that for a really long time, but it said in the Tampa Bay Times that also Tampa and Clearwater do it too. And I'm sure all these cities do it.
Right.
I mean, how many don't do it?
It seems to be standard operating procedure.
Exactly. It's what they do. So all of these things, it's all goes back to imperialism. And even the fact that you asked about the question of methane, well, when methane is in the air, it's what's called the greenhouse effect. And it's basically like what happens in a greenhouse is that it's glass and you're growing plants and it creates the carbon dioxide that stays within, just the sunlight creates the warmth for you to be able to grow plants in the winter. And so this is what happens on the whole earth, where it warms it and the heat can't escape into the atmosphere. And so methane is one of the biggest, most serious greenhouse gases. And that, it has, like we're saying, the highest parts per million, in 800,000 years.
Wow.
So, it affects so many things, the ability to grow crops, just everything on the planet, and it warms faster and faster the more greenhouse gases are in the air. So, and I didn't really know this, but carbon dioxide is supposed to be in the soil. So to the extent that it's in the air, it's not in the soil, and the soil is not rich and not producing the nourishment in the food, and just everything is into a very serious thing. There's a few other things I wanted to say about it, and then I wanted to sum up, but I read about and watched some videos of the Copenhagen Climate Change Conference, and I think it was in one of the early years of the Obama administration, and Obama went, and there was a huge delegation of colonized people, led by an African man from the continent of Africa, as well as the Filipinos, who had just had that worst hurricane ever that killed 6,000 people. I think it was about 10 years ago, and that was clearly from climate change. And many other colonized people around the world, people living on islands that are now, can't live on anymore, they have to desert them, and, in the Pacific, and just many other situations. And they were seriously protesting Obama, because Obama, he talks BS, but the U.S. is not committed to making any changes. They don't sign something that would limit carbon emissions, and the carbon emissions are mainly caused by fossil fuels, which is the burning of oil and coal, in the cars and all of this kind of thing.
Yet he ran on that platform, didn't he?
Yeah, it's a total lie.
After Bush walked out of Kyoto, the hope was that Obama was going to come in and rectify that.
Yeah, and they had serious protests there. Something that was not covered in this media, in the bourgeois media, but they had serious protests led by the colonized, faction of that. And, that Africans were talking about life and death situation. And I heard the African representative speak, and he said that if the planet Earth goes up to 2 degrees Celsius, and probably right now we're at about 1.5 degree above 1750, that it's life and death for much of the continent of Africa because of drought, because of, or in other cases, too much rain, that Africa and the southern hemisphere is going to be affected and is being affected more than anything else about it. So again, we're talking about imperialism. We're talking about the ability of the U.S. to, and the other struggle that they had, the African put out very, very clearly is, you all did this.
Right.
And so what they're doing is, what the U.S. is doing is, it's saying, well, we're not going to do anything because we're imperialism, but you, being Africa, you can't industrialize.
Mm-hmm.
You can't, have more cars. You can't uplift the lives of the people within imperialism, which means you have to do those things right now.
Mm-hmm.
It did it. We did it. Mm-hmm. Imperialism did it. But that Africans and colonized people can't do that. And so that was also, and continues to be, a serious struggle. So it was really clear that this question for colonized people of climate change is an anti-imperialist question.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's only going to change when imperialism is destroyed and African people have control over their lives.
Yeah, that makes it, for everything that I've seen in the bourgeois media, you hear all of the onus placed on China, on India, on colonized nations as the creators of this abrupt climate change of the greenhouse gases.
It's the U.S. It's just like the U.S. uses and Europe uses 75% of the stolen resources of the world, and that's part of this. Mm-hmm. The standard of living of the U.S., of the parasitism,
right,
sucking the blood of the people on the planet Earth so we can live, is not only destroying the majority of humanity, it is destroying the Earth itself. Mm. And even the ability for the Earth to have a habitat in which human beings can live. So, in a sense, it's a suicide mission, too, that it would go on just to feed the stomachs and pocketbooks of the white world at the expense of everything else, every other human being on the planet. And it's very, so to try to separate that, because I don't know, you can't separate that from imperialism. It is a continuum of the slaughter and rendering extinct of many, many cultures and civilizations on this planet for the benefit of Europe. And, when we think of this as white people sitting on the pedestal of the oppression of African people in a country built not through the hard work of white people, but through the enslavement of African people and the participation of white people in the violence and terror that it took for Africans to force Africans to be the most productive labor force that's ever existed on the planet. That's created the most wealth that has ever been created in one kind of situation, in one setting.
One horrific situation.
And this is where everything that we have comes from. So let's see if we have some people here.
This is some really dire stuff we're talking about, Chairwoman Penny Hess, and I really appreciate your political leadership on this. And it looks like we've got some outstanding comrades to salute for contributing to our goal of $1,000. Let's see here.
We have Ann Hirsch gave $25 tonight. Uhuru! All right, and that puts us at 75. Ben Rosenzweig from St. Louis, $5. All right.
Do we have? Did we mention David Rold I
think it's David.
$20.
All right, David.
Fantastic.
Really appreciate you. David rolled.
I see Lisa Watson at $100.
Wow.
Comrade Lisa.
Just saw Comrade Lisa today. Jumped on a plane and now she's back in Minnesota.
All right. Let me make sure I'm not getting this from a previous webinar.
Oh,
yeah.
you might be.
I'm going to rely on you. Yes. My apologies for error.
Oh, well, I think Lisa's still on a plane, but anyway. So we have Jackson Hollingsworth, $10.
Uhuru.
So we have raised 90.
Okay, all right.
Any other ones?
Did you mention, let's see.
Is that today? Are these today? Jamie, you might be looking at the wrong day here.
Today is January 8th, 2019.
Yes.
Go to blackpowerblueprint.org.
Yes, go to blackpowerblueprint.org and
be like Jackson, be like Ben. We have $910 remaining. So we've done this before, we're gonna do it again. And thank you to everyone who's donated so far. Again, that's blackpowerblueprint.org.
And we want to shout out Janice Kant, who on January 8th, 2019, tonight, put in $50 towards our goal tonight, blackpowerblueprint.org. That means we have raised $140 and have $860 left to go to meet our goal tonight.
Fantastic.
So go to blackpowerblueprint.org and give. This goes to the Black Power Blueprint, the actual projects of political and economic power in the hands of the African working class that is transforming on the ground the conditions of the African community of the north side of St. Louis, Missouri, the same Africans who rose up in militant resistance following the police murder of Mike Brown in 2014. Really, really powerful to see this, the development of the Uhuru House, the participation of the community. You can go to blackpowerblueprint.org and look at all the videos and pictures we have of this. Let me say a few more things about this question of climate change and what it means. And first of all,
really dire.
It is very dire. And also, they always were saying, well, we have that, the ice in the Arctic is melting, but the Antarctic ice is great. But now, just in this last year, they've said, oh my God, it's melting too. The Antarctica is melting too. So, this is, the more it's melting, and we're talking about sea level rise, and, of cities like Miami, here in Tampa, St. Petersburg, San Francisco, you're just talking about changes in so many aspects of life, So the world is changing, and this is a result of imperialism and white power. It's a result of parasitic capitalism. It didn't come about through human intervention in that way. It came about through parasitic capitalism of the white world, and that white people sit on this pedestal of the oppression of African people. I wanted to mention that one of the things that has come out a lot this year are several studies that have shown that 75 to 80% of the world's insects are gone. And that is the foundation of all life. And, so this didn't just happen in one study. There was a study in Germany, and these were done sort of coincidentally in really pristine kind of forests and just different kinds of beautiful untouched forests around the world. And one of them was in Germany, where a scientist had gone there in the 70s, and they measured the biomass of insects. And they did that by just putting, very simply, just putting out traps and catching insects in trees and on the ground. And they found that, it was very rich with all these different kinds of diversity of insects and all this sort of thing in 1970s. And then they went back in now, a couple of years ago, and there was like nothing. There was like nothing. They put these traps out, they did the same thing. And they did the same thing in not only in Germany, in Puerto Rico, in a beautiful, beautiful tropical rainforest there, and in another place, I think in Peru or Bolivia. In every single case, there was only about 20% of the insects that had been there before. So, and
So
you know,
that's
and
an
it's,
80% reduction of
yeah,
the
I mean, it's
entire
pretty much
biomass.
that, and it's saying, and these articles are like in the New York Times. This is not on some conspiracy theory thing. This is, you know, in the mainstream media. And one of the things that some of the articles are saying is like, well, if you go on a trip, like back in the day, like when my family, when we, you know, when I was a kid and we went on vacation, your entire windshield and the grill of the car would be covered with insects, and they're not now. And I also noticed that even in the last few years, here in Florida, which is pretty buggy and has been, is not as much. And remember, like coming home at night and there would be all these insects and flying around?
Oh yeah.
There's not now. Not in my house.
You're right.
They're not flying around there.
I've been going without windshield wiper for quite some time, and nothing. We laugh, but this is visibly true.
No, it is
and
very true.
Even
It's very
locally,
true.
you hear the pelicans are almost non-existent anymore.
Right.
I think I've
That's
seen
been a
2
while.
all year. Yeah. And once these creatures are gone, they don't come back.
Well, 200 species go extinct every day.
Oh.
Yeah, and that it's saying, they're saying that the Earth is in the midst, this is according to the United Nations report, the Earth is in the midst of a mass extinction of life. Scientists estimate that 150 to 200 species of plant, insect, bird, and mammal become extinct every 24 hours. This is nearly 1,000 times the natural or background rate.
Right.
In other words, if all things being equal, this is 1,000 times greater, the extinction rate, because a certain amount goes extinct, you know, in a natural way. So it's greater than anything the world has experienced since the vanishing of the dinosaurs nearly 65 million years ago. So there's that. And so, you know, I also wanted to say that in, I believe it was in September, the United Nations Scientific Panel on Climate Change made a report that said, according to the New York Times, paints a far more dire picture of the immediate consequences of climate change than previously thought, and says that avoiding the damage requires transforming the world economy at a speed and scale that has no documented historic precedent.
Not under imperialism, not under white power.
No,
certainly.
no. So that means that we have a responsibility to have revolution, because again, imperialism is not going to solve this.
No, we can't even trust them to give us the straight answer, to give us the straight conditions.
Yeah.
We have to overturn this beast just to be able to get an objective, clear view of what's going on.
And I also want to say that, you know, when indigenous people had power over their lives, when Africans had power over Africa, there was not climate change.
Right.
There was not an imbalance of the ecosystem of the world. Things were in harmony, and there was the understanding that human beings are animals,
Right.
that we are part of an ecosystem. You know, I've read books of early, you know, written by early colonizers, white colonizers in the U.S., but talking about indigenous peoples here in the U.S. And this, I think this one book called Prairie Smoke or something, it was written, you know, 100 years ago. And it was saying that, the guy saying, North American white guy, was saying that, you know, already then certain foxes and wolves were going extinct. And, you know, he quotes an indigenous leader of that time out in the Midwest saying, well, if the fox goes extinct, who's going to take its place? You know, don't you understand? It all fits together.
Right.
And, of course, you know, imperialism doesn't understand that.
No, imperialism hovers over the top of a pack of wolves that are endangered and machine guns them down.
Just as it does with human beings.
Exactly.
And, you know, any system that would enslave humans, wipe out, you know, brilliant advanced civilizations of human society, steal their land, work them to death as beasts, turn them into commodities for sale to build the wealthiest economic system that's ever existed on the planet Earth, to steal all the resources, just dig up the Earth itself, creating earthquakes and all of these things.
The fracking they're doing.
Anybody that would do that, of course, doesn't care about the Earth.
No.
I mean, they have their bunkers, and this is serious. I mean, that's in mainstream media as well. So the question is, the struggle is that imperialism has to die.
Yeah. It does.
It has to be overturned. And so many of these people who are summing up this climate change, they're like, well, there's nothing we can do.
Yeah, there's a real defeatism, isn't there?
Yeah, and there's because there's nothing that white people can do.
Right.
But, this is not going to be a white world. This is going to be an African, indigenous, Asian world. This is who it belongs to. This is the future. And if we want to be part of the future, we have to be under the leadership of that. That is what is going to create. That is what is going to create revolution. That's what Chairman Omali Yeshitela has shown in the crisis of imperialism, and the way that that the world has to be changed. Imperialism has to be destroyed. Parasitic capitalism has to be wiped out. And African and oppressed people have to have control of their land, their resources, and to use it as genuine socialism under the workers' power of the African working class, who can control their own economy, to feed all the people, to irrigate the land, not for profit, but for the benefit of human beings, to eat a healthy diet, to live, to contribute to society in a very profound way. That's the world I want to live in. And I read, there's a new phenomenon now, because we all know that all the white people are, our death rate is skyrocketing, because we see ourselves in the midst of this crisis of imperialism, and we don't see a way out.
With reports like this and
and that's one example. But there's this thing of young white people, called climate grief, in which they realize that they're not going to be able to experience a world that even my generation experienced, that they're in grief. And in fact, I was reading the statistics of suicide. Suicide has skyrocketed in the United States beginning at the age 10. At the age 10 for white people. So these children are committing suicide because they see no future and they don't want to be part of this.
And maybe they recognize this as unnatural, the way that imperialism approaches the earth.
Absolutely. So let's see, do we have any more here? We have Comrade Janice Camp, $50.
Comrade Connor Voss,
Uhuru.
$25.
Ruby Gibbelson.
All right, Ruby.
$25. We have $190. We have comments here, so I'm going to find some of this in a minute.
Excellent. Chairwoman Penny, I really appreciate this research that you've done. And one thing that infuriates me is the assumption that it was imperialism that invented science. That without imperialism we wouldn't have, measurement and civilization and studies. And it's such a lie. It's white imperialism that stole science from Africa, from Asia, from indigenous people. There were farms, there was progress, there was experimentation. You spoke about that in great length in your book, Overturning the Culture of Violence. That's been a real revelation to me in this movement.
There were things that were destroyed of the Mayans, and a lot of that came from the Olmec, the African civilization. They were called the codexes. They were their books, and imperialism just burnt them. The priests, the ones that are raping all the children now, they say 1,000 more predator priests were exposed by the Pope today, were released publicly. That they wouldn't tell anybody. Well, these are the predators who were an advance guard. They were the vanguard of imperialism in a lot of ways. They went into, the America, what is now called the Americas, and participated and led the way in the genocide against the indigenous people in so many ways.
Yeah.
So, climate change, we're talking about human beings, intricate part of this entire ecosystem of the earth. So, the question is that if you did not believe, as assuming I'm speaking to a lot of North Americans or white people or Europeans, if you did not believe that we need revolution, this is the only choice now. Imperialism will not solve this. It will continue to rape the earth. It is not, and it's not just Trump. I mean, Trump's like, oh no, we're not going to do any of that. I don't even believe in climate change. But, Obama was the same.
Right.
So it doesn't, he just said things, but he didn't do anything. Because it's saying, the UN is saying, that this requires transforming the world economy. So you know what it means? It means no more cars, no more airplanes, no more ships, no more internet. That's really what it means. All of that is dependent on fossil fuels. All of that. And I hear on these different kinds of discussions of scientists or people who are putting this out, they're saying, well, what we need to do is, we got to go solar, and we got to go 100% solar, and we have to do this and that. But first of all, there's a state. Don't you get it? There's a state. There's a state that protects the interests of imperialism. Yes. It has bombs. It has guns. It has the biggest army in the world, and is backed by the same people who are fossil fuel corporations, and who dig the oil, and who colonize Africa, and who the whole military is there in AFRICOM, and all of this kind of thing. And they were like, all we have to do is we just have to love each other, and we have to do this. Bullshit. There's the state, as the chairman said, the state is the instrument of violence and coercion that upholds the interest of the ruling class.
Yes.
So there's no way that the U.S. state is ever going to meet the needs of what this earth, would demand in order to survive. The people have to do that, and that because we as white people sit on the pedestal, that's how we got to be where we are. This is why we are the wealthiest. This is why we can only see the world, as the chairman says, as subjects of history. We can only see ourselves and how this affects us because we sit on this pedestal. We don't even see the world as anybody else experiences it. And it's why colonized people don't experience the question of climate change in the same way that we do. They see it as an anti-imperial struggle, and indeed it is. And so, it is part of the only solution is for African people to have control over their lives, and that we can be there as the extension of the African Revolution under the leadership of that. So, a lot of people, they talk about and expose the different symptoms of the crisis of imperialism, whether it's, and there's certain shows, a few shows of leftists and liberals that come on every single day, and they've got more and more and more horrible things that imperialism is doing. But they never want to change it. They have an interest in exposing this. That's how they make their living, And the only one that is fighting to change it right now on this planet is the African People's Socialist Party. The only one that is saying, no, we're going to change it. We don't want to hear, more killings of African teenagers, or white nationalist violence, or police violence against the African community, or mass incarceration, or poverty, or all the horrific things, or U.S. bombs and drones and occupation all over the world. The African People's Socialist Party is saying, yeah, but to what end is the struggle against that? There has to be revolution, and that's what this is about. And the entire white, liberal and left, and many others, combine together to attack the African Revolution, combined with the U.S. government. And, the African People's Socialist Party has been in existence for 48 years, I think. And
wow.
the 46 years, I think it is, and that Chairman O'Malley Shatella has been a revolutionary for more than 50 years.
Yes.
And you know, you don't make a revolution by talking about it,
Right.
by exposing something, by love, by you know, any other talk fest that you might have. You don't stop a revolution by slander,
Right.
or by gossip,
Yes.
or by any other kind of thing like that. This has nothing to do with that. This is an organization, the African People's Socialist Party, that has built the infrastructure on the science that it takes to make revolution. Revolution is based on will. It is based on the unity of will of an entire organization, iron discipline, and cadre. And cadre will do whatever is necessary, however long it takes. To win a revolution, they will do it. And that's what this party is. And it can't come down because, you know, because somebody or some unity with the state has, you know, it can't be attacked in that way.
Right.
Because this is different. This is an institution grounded in every continent of the world. It is Africans who live in townships. You know what, that's a euphemism for the extreme poverty of the Africans who own the land of Azania, that they call South Africa, that own that land. It's their land, but they're forced to live basically on reservations, not very similar to the indigenous people here, in little tiny shacks with no plumbing, you know, nothing on their own land, as white settler colonizers still own, you know, the vast majority of the land there. That's where the African People's Socialist Party is, in those townships. They're in Kenya, where, you know, the British imperialism was so brutal that it, you know, it crushed resistance, or it tried to, by hanging thousands and thousands of the Africans who were rising up against British colonialism. And it raped women, and rape isn't even the word. It tortured women by breaking glass and putting broken glass and rats in their vagina and up in the anuses of African men. This came out, they had some kind of so-called trial about this in London not too long ago, which is so easy to do, you know, 60 years later.
Right.
But Africans on the continent and in Kenya still live under complete and total hell of US and British imperialism. They still control it. And white people still live in that happy valley with all these mansions there, and etc. And this is where the party is. It's in Europe, where Africans are jumping on any ship, anything that floats for a minute, to try to get across the Mediterranean to get to their own stolen resources and a standard, you know, an attempt for a standard of living that has been stolen from them. And over 3,000 Africans have died that way this year alone, or 2018 alone. That's where the party is. That's where the African People's Socialist Party is. It's in, you know, it's in Brooklyn, it's in Philly, which is where 23% of the population is starving. You know, I mean, or the starvation, let's say, has increased 23% in the last few years in the African community. It is in Oakland. It is everywhere that Africans are. And this is what it's about. And that took hell, that took work, that took fight, that took brilliance, that took discipline, that took incredible dedication on the part of African People's Socialist Party leader, Chairman O'Malley Shatella, to put that in place, to win it. You know, this man is in his 70s, and he is still fighting to win, to educate, to organize every single day. He's determined that Africa will be free in his lifetime, and that the conditions of imperialism are forcing African people and oppressed people into revolution because there's no choice. You can't live anymore. And, you know, nobody can live under this.
No, there's no reforming this.
Yeah, so we're talking about cadre, we're talking about African internationalism, we're talking about Chairman Omali Yeshitela, who are determined, who have lived their whole lives, who could have done anything they wanted to do, but they didn't. They thought, who else is doing that?
Right.
And when we talk about, something that's made up or something that anybody can just say in words, this organization has done the work. This has done the frickin' work.
Yes.
And it has worked its ass off for all these years, because Africa is going to be free, even as the sea level rises and methane explodes, whatever. It's taking what belongs to them, and it is going to solve the problems of the future. And white people are not going to lead it.
Yes.
Nor are neocolonialists, nor are any other people who unite with imperialism or act as its, its go boys, whatever it is, that African people are going to be free. And that if you're not talking about that, I'm not interested in anything you're talking about, because you're not going to solve climate change, and you're not going to solve anything but to your own stomach and pocketbook, and that's short-lived. Because there are people that say that this, we can be extinct in the next 34 years or less. So if you're white, if you're North American, if you're European, if you're Australian, if you're sitting there on the stolen land of Africa or Israel, if you're a white person, if you're a white colonizer, any place in the world, get on board. Because the masses of African and oppressed people are rising up. They're going to take it. They're going to live. They're going to feed their children. They're going to use the brilliance of their own brains for themselves. They're going to solve their problems. They're going to cure their diseases. They're going to get rid of carbon dioxide in the air. They're going to put it back in the soil. They're going to grow food. They're going to save the world. They're going to bring anybody with them that wants to go. And what we have to do is go into this white, horrible, vicious white society that we can't stand so much that we're either drugging ourselves with opioids, killing ourselves, or drinking ourselves to death, and we're going to unleash those stolen resources, not for some silly thing like, oh, let's go to a bar and buy a drink for an African as reparations. No. This is about returning the stolen resources that is the foundation of imperialism, and turning it back over to the African Revolution and the organized African working class. That's what this is about. That's what this is about. And if you support that, we need $1,000 tonight, because the Black Power Blueprint does not take money from anything. It doesn't take money from the government. It doesn't take money. It has integrity of what it's for. And by the way, the African People's Socialist Party is transparent. So if you want to know what it's about, read the Burning Spear newspaper and read the platform of the party. There is no hidden agenda. That's what it's about. And if you want to join this movement and try to, if the police tried to join that, well, they're going to have to work their asses off too, because this is what it's about. So I know we have some comments we're going to read. We have Keith Robeson, $30. Uhuru. Diane Patisse, $25. Uhuru. And we have raised $245. We have a comment given in memory of her son. This is from Diane. Son Francisco Estrada, who would have been 44 years old today and a fighter for indigenous people everywhere. Rest in power. Uhuru, Diane. Uhuru. Very moving and very powerful, and salute to the memory of your son. What better way could there be? There could be no better way to have a memorial for your son than to donate to the Black Power Blueprint, which is changing the world.
Yes, please.
Can we please just give another round of applause for Chairman Penny Hess?
fight for reparations.
I want to express my complete unity with the statement that Chairwoman Penny Hess just made, and I want to echo the call for any white people watching this to go to blackpowerblueprint.org and to go ahead and pay reparations tonight. And where did we say we're at with our goal?
Let's see, we've raised 245, we have 755 to go.
Okay, 755. So that is great that we've raised that 245 already. We need to raise another 755. And I just want to unite with, there's two main things I wanted to say real quick. One is I just wanted to unite with this entire discussion and the fact that, you know, the African People's Socialist Party, the Black Power Blueprint, is transparent. There's no mystery about where the money goes in this organization. In fact, this Black Power Blueprint campaign had a goal to raise in the last year, 2018, and thanks to you all, raised over $100,000, a little bit over $100,000. And you saw with that amount of money, which while it is incredible that we raised that money, it's actually in the grand scheme of things not that much money. That's the average income of the average white family in the United States.
Yes.
That's a low income in San Francisco, California.
Low income in San Francisco, California.
Yes.
And the African working class, which knows better than anyone how to make something out of nothing, is able to, with that relatively small amount of resources that is low income for a white family in San Francisco, take that reparations and transform it into a beautiful, vibrant community center in the form of the Uhuru House in St. Louis that went in less than a year from an abandoned, rundown building that I visited and literally fell through the floor. And now people are dancing on those floors at graduation parties and having birthday parties and weddings and all kinds of things in that magnificent community center, and also using it as an organizing headquarters to launch campaigns like the Keep 28 campaign to fight back against the gerrymandering of African voters in St. Louis, and all other kinds of things that are happening in St. Louis. That happened with a relatively small amount of money. You saw the transformation of that community in North St. Louis. You see the launching of Phase 3 now. You saw the demolition of those buildings. Like, it was not a mystery. And if you think it's some trick photography going on, get on a plane and go see it for yourself. I've seen it. I've touched it. I've smelled it. I've seen it with my own eyes. It's real. It's amazing. It's concrete. Those buildings came down. They put a fence around. Now the African community there is getting ready to have a marketplace. They put up a 50-foot flagpole, and now flying in the St. Louis sky over the African community of North St. Louis is the biggest and most beautiful red, black, and green flag. And if you wonder where does your money go when you go to blackpowerblueprint.org, you can come to St. Louis and you can see tomorrow school buses filled with African children riding past the Uhuru House, and African children's fists going through the windows of the school bus and screaming in joy as they see the flag of the African nation flying above the Uhuru House. That's where your money goes.
Right.
That's where the money goes. And central to all of this, the last thing I wanted to say is the leadership, of course, of our leader, our incredible, brilliant leader of the African Revolution, Chairman Omali Yeshitela, and also another brilliant leader, Deputy Chair Onezene Yeshitela, who is a powerful, powerful leader on the economic front of building this Black Power blueprint, of building in St. Louis, but all over the world, who has gone with the chairman to Africa, to those quote-unquote townships, and organized amongst African workers there, who is Garveyism of the 21st century embodied in the form of one person, in the form of this amazing leader. And Chairwoman Penny talked about, the assaults on African people, including on African women, that have happened throughout history, that British imperialism would crack bottles and shove them in the vaginas of African women. You saw Mary Turner and other African women in this country who were hanged and lynched by mobs of white people, where they tore the baby out of her womb and stomped its skull until the baby died, and then, shot her to death with hundreds of bullet fire. And in defiance of that legacy of white terror against African people and African women is the stance of the chairman and the stance of Deputy Chair Onezene Yeshitela, the heroic leadership of the African working class and of African women, embodied by the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party. So if that's the side of history that you want to be on, you need to go to blackpowerblueprint.org and contribute towards chipping away at that goal. We only have $755 left to raise.
And let me raise, and thank you, Jesse. Very powerful.
Yeah, let's give it a round of applause.
Really. And I just want to read some of these amazing statements here. We read the very moving statement from Diane Batiste and from Ruby Gittleson that said, "Thank you for this important discussion on mass extinction and imperialism's destruction of the planet. Most of all, I appreciate the analysis that imperialism caused it.
Yes.
If you want to save the earth, the only solution is African revolution." Uhuru.
Uhuru.
Jackson Hollingsworth, who's with us here tonight in this room, says, "Victory to the African working class. Environmentalism is an imperialist question. Reparations now."
Uhuru.
And Benjamin Rosenzweig says, "Uhuru, the only way to solve the climate crisis is through the material and political empowerment of the African working class. Unity
Yes.
through reparations."
Uhuru.
And Ann Hirsch says, "There is no organization on the planet doing what the Uhuru movement is doing. I support the work of the Black Power Blueprint, Reparations Now, returning the stolen inheritance of African people that built white society."
Uhuru.
And
Man.
Connor Voss said, "Athena Malloy contributed this as part of Giving Tuesday for the Black Power Blueprint." Well, this might be another day, but anyway, 2018.
Hey,
So
hey.
that was $300, and that was a few
Yes.
weeks ago.
Yeah, Uhuru.
All right, so yeah, so we still have to
Blackpower.org.
raise. Oops, we have to raise some more here.
I think it's so important I want to unite with everything that you just said, Chair Jesse and Chairwoman Penny. And what Ann Hirsch said was quite to the point. There is no other organization doing what the Uhuru movement does.
Yes.
And that's something you can verify for yourself. As Chair Jesse was just saying, there is no other organization that is struggling to put state power in the hands of the African working class. That you just think about the daunting extent of that task. To have been struggling for that, sometimes single-handedly, as Chairman Amalia Shatella has been for 50 years, whether it's meant prison, whether it's meant hard labor, whether it's meant attacks against him and his family. He has never stopped struggling for the freedom of African people, for the absolute liberation of Africa and all its resources, the birthright of African people everywhere. There is no other organization doing this. There is no better way that you could put your money to a positive vision of the future that we can really believe in than going to blackpowerblueprint.org and making your donation, making your payment of reparations or support for this incredible vision of liberated people.
Uhuru, I unite with what Jamie just said, and I just want to say, no matter if you're checking your bank account right now and you're like, man, I can't afford to make a real serious donation. Whatever you can do, it makes a difference.
Yes.
Whatever you can do. If you can do $50, like Amanda Carlozzi, who just put in $50, or who or if you can do $5, like Kyle Weiss, who just put in $5, or who
Kyle.
It goes a long way. So be like Amanda, be like Kyle, and put in whatever you can to help chip away at our goal tonight. We just reached $300, I just want to say. So we just reached 300, which means we have 700 left to go to reach our goal of $1,000 tonight. blackpowerblueprint.org.
And you just moved me, comrade. It's true. No amount is too little. I'm going to make a contribution of $10 tonight. Let's make that 310. And I really want to salute everyone out there who has donated so far. Thank you. Thank you for putting
Jamie Simpson at $10 as well. That brings us to $680 that we have left to raise tonight.
And you said Kyle Weiss.
Kyle Weiss,
$5?
yes, $5.
Okay.
Excellent.
Comrade.
Uhuru. Kyle.
A little under the weather there, but we miss you.
Yes, we're pulling for you, comrade. Get well soon.
Yes.
We really appreciate all the work you've done to build these webinars and everyone in this room, too. I want to give a salute to our studio audience. So tonight we're discussing the question of abrupt climate change and imperialism, and the fact that it was imperialism that caused the horrific state that we find ourselves in as living creatures on planet Earth, and the question of whether or not this planet is going to be able to continue to sustain life itself. And this question is not at all separate from the question of imperialism and the question of the African Revolution. Because without the African Revolution, we're never going to get rid of this beast. This thing is not going down without African people taking back what is theirs. And that's exactly what the Black Power Blueprint is. It is a template for African people, for oppressed people the world over, to take the power of their own land, lives, and resources back into their own hands. and that is a concrete and tangible project. It exists in St. Louis, it exists here in St. Petersburg, it exists anywhere you see the Uhuru movement. But right now it's exploding in St. Louis, where we saw in 2014, we can't forget this either, that we saw Mike Brown gunned down in the middle of the street, left to rot, treated worse than they would treat an animal.
Yes.
And the whole country saw that. And how much did the murderer of Mike Brown wind up earning, Jesse?
I think it was at least $1 million.
At least $1 million.
Yep.
We're talking about $100,000. Darren Wilson.
Yep.
He got $1 million.
GoFundMe had to shut down his GoFundMe account because white people were donating so much money to his
That's right.
campaign.
Right, and this speaks to why the African People's Socialist Party is so brilliant, why Chairman Omali and Shatella had such faith and vision in forming the African People's Solidarity Committee, so that there would be a strategic front in the white community to take on this kind of obscene white nationalist unity with colonial parasitic capitalism, which is what it's been from the day one, right? We saw it with Zimmerman, and we saw it just last week with this disgusting person who went into a restaurant and tried to assault an African
Right here in St. Petersburg.
Right here in St. Petersburg.
Yeah, and that was connected to the climate change because straws were banned in the city of St. Petersburg because they were killing the turtles. And the guy went in and said, "Give me a straw," and the African woman was like, "No, I can't because it's illegal now." And he just grabbed her because an African, just grabbed her, and she fought back.
Rick Kreisman, the mayor, put that law in place. So if anything, the guy should have gone to City Hall and grabbed Kreisman across his desk. But instead, he assaulted an African working class woman.
So true.
And he got his ass kicked.
I was going to say that there's an article. There's one good side effect of climate change, and that is that there's an article that said the Pentagon warns climate change threatens 50% of U.S. military installations.
Hey, okay.
Well, that's way to go, climate change. Let's be honest. How much of that is really about climate change, and how many of that is the rising resistance of colonized people that's chasing U.S. imperialism out of the colonies?
Very true.
There you go.
Very true. So, so we're talking about, just that we have to change this world, that that African people are struggling to be free no matter what, that the majority of the people on the planet Earth have no choice but revolution to do this. When the chairman talks about the, this, what he calls the uneasy equilibrium, this balance, this constantly changing balance between the past and the future, between the oppressed and the oppressor, that is shifting more and more into, firmly into the side of the oppressed. He's talking about resistance. He's talking about the fact that colonized people laugh at the U.S. Now, they don't care. They're not afraid of it. Nobody's intimidated by it. That it's interesting to see how, the chairman calls that white people have been the subjects of history, but more and more African and oppressed peoples are the subjects of history and imposing that on the narrative. Like we see, all these places where even the statues of Columbus, they have to take it down. In San Francisco, they had to take Columbus down. And this picture, this statue of, that showed a settler into San Francisco that had an indigenous man at his feet, laying down prone. That had been in front of the San Francisco Library or in the Civic Center for, I don't know, 100 years or 50 years or more, much more than, for a long time. So they took it down, and they took it down in the middle of the night so nobody would have a riot. But the indigenous people were there with their drums, protesting the fact that it even existed, but it was that struggle. And so this is what we're seeing, We're seeing that all ramifications and glorification of the enslavement of African people, all these statues of Civil War heroes that we see all over the South are being forced to be taken down. And that's not revolutionary, but that's indicative of the fact that the point of view of the African oppressed working class is making itself heard
Yes.
and demanding the results. So it's part of the consciousness that is raising, that is being raised here and all over the world, that any kind of, the imperialism can't glorify itself anymore.
Right.
Secretary General Awezi Kinshasa, who's the Secretary General of the African Socialist International, which is the organization of African People's Socialist parties all over the world, throughout Africa and everywhere, was telling me just the other day, he is based in London, but he was born in Congo, that in Belgium, which colonized Congo and responsible for killing, slaughtering, committing genocide at the turn of the 20th century against 10 million African people in Congo, but there was no word for genocide then.
Right.
But he was telling me that now in Belgium, I guess in Antwerp or Brussels, there's a big statue, they put up a big statue of Lumumba. Well, they killed Lumumba. The US and Belgium killed Lumumba. It's just like Martin Luther King. They killed Martin Luther King and then they put up a statue and give you a holiday and all that kind of thing. So,
Just disgusting.
but
And
they have to do that because of this subject, the whole question of the narrative through the eyes of the African working class is forcing itself onto imperialism.
Yes.
And that is very, very important. That's an important part of the rising consciousness of African and oppressed peoples around the world.
And in the past couple of years, we saw the same thing with the Cecil Rhodes statue. in
Rhodes
occupied
must
Azania.
fall.
Yeah.
And Rhodes went to
Oxford.
So anyway, so so go to blackpowerblueprint.org.
Be like Renee Nassar.
Yes.
$5. Uhuru. We have raised $325 today, and we have 675 remaining, if my numbers are current. And we're coming close to the end here. So again, that's blackpowerblueprint.org. Please go there and donate generously.
Yes.
Put a down payment on the future for
Put
yourself.
a down payment on the future. Let's see if we can at least get up to 500 tonight before we close out.
Let's get to 500.
That would be
So
another
this is
$175.
So that would be 5 people putting in $25.
5 people putting in
Putting in
25. I know we got more than 5 people watching tonight. Even if you've already put in, see if you can put in another 25 and then inspire 4 other people like you to do the same. blackpowerblueprint.org. I think collectively, not only those of us in this room, but everyone watching tonight on YouTube and Facebook. And if you are not watching on YouTube, go over to our YouTube channel and subscribe if you haven't already. YouTube.com/BlackPowerBlueprint. There you go. YouTube.com/BlackPowerBlueprint. And hit subscribe to our channel.
Yes.
And when you're done doing that,
Well, we're
back another
actually on
tab.
the Uhuru Solidarity Movement.
Oh,
tonight,
thank you.
but
Subscribe
you
to
can go there
both.
too, but you
Subscribe
can-
to both. YouTube.com/BlackPowerBlueprint. Good stuff. Every other Tuesday night, 8 p.m. A webinar, a web event. Go to YouTube.com/Uhuru Solidarity. That's what you're watching right now. And subscribe to that as well. So we want to encourage you, go to blackpowerblueprint.org. We still have another 5 minutes to raise $175. I know we can do it. Can't we do that, Jamie?
We absolutely can.
Yes,
I'm
absolutely.
confident. I'm confident that we can reject the cynicism that's
Yes.
coming out
Yes.
from so many corners. And even in the environmental world, where some of these statistics, which are real, the conclusion is that there's no hope. The conclusion is that you might as well do whatever you wanted to do before we all die.
Right.
And I refuse to accept
carry
that.
out your bucket list. 'Cause
Right.
You're going to kick the bucket.
Yeah, go ahead. All bets are off. But
Right.
here in the Uhuru Solidarity Movement, the African People's Solidarity Committee, the African People's Socialist Party refuses to bow down to that kind of pessimistic and cynical worldview. It has an invincible sense of optimism and determination that African people will be free come hell or high water.
Yeah,
And
and the will to struggle, the will
Yes.
to fight,
Yeah.
the will to, be free.
Yes.
Exactly. And what's on my bucket list is the death of imperialism and the liberation of Africa and African people. And if you feel the same way, which I'm sure you do, and move that right on up to the top of your bucket list, and go to blackpowerblueprint.org and put in some reparations tonight.
Another nail in the coffin of imperialism.
Yes.
And we have some important announcements, so please continue to go to blackpowerblueprint.org while we inform you of the upcoming events. So first on the list, here in St. Petersburg, Florida, January 17th at 7 p.m., the Uhuru Solidarity Movement St. Pete is going to host an event called Stop the Police Lockdown of the Black Community on Martin Luther King Day. This is a critical solidarity mobilization, and it will take place at the St. Petersburg Uhuru House, where we are right now, 1245 18th Avenue South, St. Petersburg, Florida. And you can RSVP, again, that's January 17th at the Uhuru House, and time is 7 p.m. It will start at 7 p.m. You can RSVP for this event at handsoffmlkday2019.eventbrite.com and go to facebook.com/USM St. Pete for more info. And then following that, and this is something that we'll go into in future webinars, January 21st, Black Power 96.3 FM radio is holding an MLK Day Freedomite 727 featuring local performers and food vendors. It will take place at the St. Petersburg Uhuru House. Again, that address is 1245 18th Avenue South, and you can go to facebook.com/blackpower96fm for more info. And coming up a little further down the line, March 23rd and 24th, the African National Women's Organization will be holding its National Plenary or Planning Conference at the St. Louis Uhuru House at 4101 West Florissant Avenue. You can go to ANWO or ANWOUhuru.org for the registration information. And in April, the 6th and 7th, the Black is Back Coalition for Peace and Justice, for Peace, Justice, and Reparations is holding its third electoral school at the St. Petersburg Uhuru House. You can go to blackisbackcoalition.org for registration information. And April 13th and 14th, the Uhuru Solidarity Movement is holding its national convention at the beautiful St. Louis Uhuru House. You can find out more information and register at uhurusolidarity.org.
Uhuru, and I want to shout out all of the USM comrades in St. Louis.
Yes.
Casey Mackey and others, Cece, Gregory, Neto, Carly, and comrade Ben Rosenzweig, who put in another $10 tonight.
All right.
Ben, that's the spirit.
That means that we have raised $335 and have merely $165 left to go. And I stand corrected because Jackson Hollingsworth just put in another $5 as well. Uhuru Jackson.
All right.
We raised $340,
Uhuru.
a mere $160 left to raise before we close out tonight's event.
And Ben said, we can do it!
Yes.
Do $10 more for the African working class in revolution and for all those who have come before. Save the African working class, save the planet.
Uhuru, you've moved me. I'm gonna make mine 20. I'm gonna make it happen.
Uhuru.
All right, Uhuru. If you're out there,
Jamie, you moved me. I'm going to make mine 20 as well.
Uhuru.
All right.
Uhuru.
So that means we have 140 left to raise, and I've just received word that our comrade Johan Benningfield's having some computer issues, but is going to donate as soon as the webinar is over at $15, which means that we are at $130 left to raise. Uhuru.
All right. Uhuru.
All right,
Maybe less,
$130.
Okay, 160 minus 20
So 13 people put in 10.
minus 15. What's 140
Well,
minus 15?
125.
125 left to raise before we close out tonight's
Oh,
webinar.
okay, so who?
Yes.
Okay, so
Because
we're-
Jamie and I are both, yes, okay, thank you.
Okay.
We're getting confirmation from Financial Wiz, Amanda Carlozzi, thank you very much for the update. So, 125 left to raise. Uhuru.
Every time somebody does this, it is a really significant political statement, and
Yes.
you really,
Yes.
we really hope everyone out there internalizes your significance as a supporter of this movement if you're a white person, as someone who is taking a stand of reparations in this world, we're sending a message directly to our own ruling class. You know, we're putting them on notice that we are a group of people they cannot count on to be a bastion of support for white nationalism and for imperialism, for the continued plunder of Africa and African people. The buck stops here. So, and we do this under the leadership of the African Revolution. We do this as a strategic part of the African liberation movement.
And not because they say they are, the African Revolution is leading because it does it.
Yes.
It does the work.
Yes.
You know, it's an organization of action and a complete unity of politics and action and building and creating revolution. And again, it is a disciplined cadre, democratic centralism. It's an organization that works with one voice and one mind, because that will to win liberation for the African working class is not something that you can have all opinions on, because always the ruling class is against it.
Yes.
It has to be an organization dedicated to one thing and one thing only, and that's African liberation and African freedom and the interests of the African working class, who have fought every revolution for the petty bourgeoisie and have never been able to benefit from that. This time, as the chairman says, African working class is going to lead, and therefore Africa and all African people and oppressed and colonized peoples around the world will be free, because when Africa is free, imperialism will fall.
Yes.
Africa is the cornerstone of the wealth of the world, of imperialism, parasitic capitalism. It can't live without it.
Right.
So it's going down. It's going down, and Africa's going to be free.
No more giant pit mines that are controlled by outside companies in Africa. And that's what it is. When you look at the countryside of Africa, these gaping holes where it's clear that this monstrosity we know as white power, as imperialism, is just going in and sucking up all the resources.
And leaving, I'm talking about that alone, like how much of the earth and down into the crust of the earth has been uprooted and put in trains and shipped to the coast. And, while the people never see a diamond, they never see gold, they never see uranium, they have no idea what that is. And if they actually work in a mine, they get a cup of rice or 30 cents a day if they find a diamond. It's just, it's like, we're talking about colonialism, and it's not over.
No.
Colonialism is not over. It's alive and well, and Africans are going to have Africa, and they're going to have their resources, and they're going to have their animals and their land and their forests and their ivory and everything, and their elephants. They're going to have it. It's going to be theirs. And it's just, think how long imperialism has been raping and plundering Africa, but yet it's still so rich.
Yes.
And
Africa is not poor; it's being looted, as Chairman Tella says.
That's so right. And the people are brilliant. They're amazing, and it's the inevitable course of history.
It is. And when we see this, what Chairwoman Penny is laying out, this beautiful vision of African people having their own land and resources back, it's going to deprive imperialism of those resources, which it needs. It needs the oil, it needs the tin, it needs the copper, it needs the coltan, it needs all the gold.
But not for profit.
No.
For the benefit of the people. So we're going to see science in a whole different way, because you know what? Science under imperialism, you were talking about that earlier, it can't solve the problem because it created it with a mindset of how science functions under a parasitic capitalist system.
Yes.
But if you have science under the leadership of socialism, which is the leadership of the empowered, the African working class in power and control over the means of production, then science has a totally different premise.
Yeah.
It has a premise to, to make the world a better place for all human beings, and not to create the nuclear bomb and, all the weapons of mass destruction that really has been the main thrust of science under imperialism, or even computers, or go to the space so that, imperialism can continue to control the world on every front. But just imagine what it will be, when science is in the hands of the people and it can benefit. The ability, spend time finding ways to make life richer and better for every human being, and to feed and nourish and house all humanity.
The sky's the limit.
Yeah, and then, all the arts and the culture that so much comes from Africa will be back into the hands of African people, and not a commodity for sale for the benefit of white power.
It was this movement that introduced me to the concept of the genius of the people, I think that's what you're talking about, and it's such a real thing and a beautiful thing to see the genius of the masses coming out.
Absolutely.
And to imagine what it's going to be like after imperialism, when we're really able to talk about a post-colonial world. But we can use that now. That African internationalism allows us to unleash so much creativity, so much passion, and we can do whatever we're excited about, whatever we're passionate about. We can turn it into a weapon against imperialism by turning it into an engine for reparations. And tonight we're calling on you to go again to blackpowerblueprint.org and make that contribution. So
we have $125 remaining, and we ask you to go on after this is over, put your resources in, get us to $500 tonight, and anything else?
We just want to echo.
I do have one other thing. Next week, Black Power Blueprint will be having its web event, and it's called Taking Back the Legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King. And it's going to talk about, who Dr. Martin Luther King is, and we're going to have a very special guest, Chairman Omali Shatella.
Fantastic.
Is going to be on. So, really exciting. And, we want, and the chairman will also talk about the struggle for control over the Martin Luther King Day parade and festival here in St. Petersburg, which has 100,000 people. It's the largest Martin Luther King Day parade in the country, but they will not allow it to come into the African community, which is who supports it and where it started.
Right.
And there's literally martial law and military occupation of the community in these streets right here in front of the Uhuru House on Martin Luther King Day. And the African People's Socialist Party, Black Power 96.3 FM radio station here in the beautiful Uhuru House, is waging a powerful campaign in the community. And the community is like, yes, they want their festival, they want their parade back. So it's a great struggle going on, and we'll be talking about that next week, January 15th, blackpowerblueprint.org, and go to the Black Power Blueprint YouTube channel and Black Power Blueprint Facebook, sign up, and all those things.
It's an urgent
become
campaign.
A subscriber.
Uhuru, the question of Martin Luther King Day parade is really critical to the African community here in St. Pete and around the world. That the African community should have control of the narrative of their own martyr. And again, the Uhuru Solidarity Movement just wanted to put out January 17th at 7 p.m. right here at the Uhuru House. The event is called Stop the Police Lockdown of the Black Community on Martin Luther King Day. It's a solidarity mobilization that takes place here at the St. Pete Uhuru House, 7 p.m. January 17th at 1245 18th Avenue South. And again, you can RSVP at handsoffmlkday2019.eventbrite.com and go to facebook.com/USM St. Pete for more info. And so, any last words, Chairwoman Penny?
Well, I just want to close out by thanking everybody who contributed reparations tonight, and we'll hope to see you next week at the Black Power Blueprint YouTube channel. And just to say, unity through reparations!
Uhuru.